good. Do the good. Whatever makes you feel good.
Have you ever watched my Twitch
What about
channel?
your duty and obligations? Do you have any of those? Do you just have a set of sequence of entitlements that you call rights with 0 duties and 0 rights?
Actually, Twitch chat also puts pressure on me. I think this is mentality that I came on my own, which was really hard because there's, like I said, so much pressure from everyone.
Yeah, but answer to my question. So my question is, do you just have a sequence of entitlements, or do you have any duties and obligations to anybody for anything ever?
Your question is very vague. Can you paraphrase it to
I
be more
don't know how it
specific?
could possibly be more precise. Do you know what a duty is?
Could you define that
No,
for
I'm
me?
just asking if you know what one is before I define it. Before we become too overly pedantic, I just want to make sure that you are going to tell me that you don't know what that word means first before I define it. Not that you're making me do it because you want to be overly pedantic.
English is my second language.
Yeah,
I
that
don't
doesn't
even
mean
know
that you
what
don't
pedant
understand
is.
what I'm saying.
What
I
is
don't know how
pedant?
this relates. She was talking about freedom of choice, and you said, well, you're legally allowed to do whatever you want. And then she was talking about socialization and being inculcated
because
to
what
have
did
certain
she-
habits. And you said, what's wrong with shame?
Yeah.
It's fine to be shamed, but she's saying that women aren't avoiding promiscuity because of the adverse effects that you think are inherent to promiscuity. It's because they don't want to be called a 304 or a slut. If you think there's
That's
negative...
not what she said.
That is what she's implying.
Well,
She's saying
hang
if
on,
there's
hang on.
actually
What she-
negative side effects
No.
to
We're
having a
talking
lot of
about
sex,
monogamy. I
those will
disagree.
manifest in themselves. It doesn't have to take the form of guys
Yeah.
calling her a slut. That's the sort
That's
of
not what we're talking about.
absence
That's
of freedom
not
of
what we're
choice. That is what
talking-
she was
no,
saying.
No,
You're-
we were
what you're
talking
doing
about
is
She's talking about
monogamy.
girls being slut
You were
shamed.
talking
No,
about
we're talking about
monogamy, yeah.
monogamy and the expectation to have
She's saying
get married and have children.
society, she feels like it's not fair that society is casting stigma on social behaviors. That's what she's actually saying.
She's saying
I think
it's
she was
mutually
just
exclusive with freedom
acknowledging.
of choice, and you understood freedom of choice to mean legal rights, and she was saying
No, not just legal
judgment
rights.
and socialization and stigma.
That's
and
what
then
I'm
you
talking
said,
about
what's
is
wrong with
stigma.
Yeah.
Literally talking about stigma right this second. That's why I'm asking, do you feel like you only have a sequence of entitlements which are given, or do you feel like you have any duties and obligations
What is the
external to
duty?
those? A duty, an obligation.
To who?
Like a
to
child
what?
or a dog or a job.
Like if you're a
or
parent,
friends.
do you have a duty to feed your child if you're a parent?
I'm not a parent. You want me to imagine
If
what
you
it's
were,
like?
how would you feel if you ate breakfast this morning?
How would I feel if I eat breakfast?
Yeah.
Full?
Yeah, how would you feel bad if you didn't eat breakfast this morning?
I would require more minerals. That is correct.
Okay, great. So we know that you can do hypotheticals, so let's not be pedantic then. So,
I still don't know what pedantic is.
yeah, you don't know what it is? You don't know what pedantry is because English is your second language? Are
That
you
is
sure?
correct.
Okay. Well, let's move into it anyway. I'm just going to ask, and I'll use really small words. Do you have a duty? And if you don't know what the word duty means when I say it in the context of feeding a child, I'll tell you.
Are you asking me to answer if I had a child, would I feed the child? And that's
Now,
your
do you have a
definition of
duty to feed the child? Some obligation?
I would feed my child.
Do you have an obligation to feed your child?
I feel like this is a lot of semantics.
Legally, yes, you do have an
when you make an
obligation to feed
argument,
your
semantics
child.
are super important. So I'm just wondering, do you have an obligation to feed your child?
I would feed my child.
Do you have an obligation to do that, though?
Yes,
What
legally
does
you
he
have
want
an
from me?
obligation.
I don't understand.
Yeah,
Legally-
you
yeah.
don't understand
No.
that when I ask you one question and then you answer to a question I didn't ask you, that you
You're
don't understand
really
why I keep
confusing
repeating
me,
the question.
Andrew.
If I say, would you feed your child? And you say, yes, I'd feed my child, then that's an answer to that question. If I ask you if you have an obligation to feed your child and you say, I would feed my child, that's not answering if you think you have an obligation to do so.
I will feed my child,
Okay.
and that is the last
So
thing
you're
I'm
just
going to
not
say.
gonna answer
No, but
the
you
question.
have.
But
do you have
you would
a
feed your
duty?
child because you
do you have
feel
an obligation?
obligated.
Like because you have to, basically. It's you have
If
to
my
feed
child
your
is
kid.
hungry, I will feed him. Yes.
No, but do you have an obligation to feed your child?
Like, let's put it this way. You could. Some guy wants to fly you out to France for $2 million, or your baby needs to eat, and you're like,
Wait,
well,
into
I
the
don't-
mic, please.
well, the baby, I don't have to feed the baby, it'll live, but I can go on this France trip. Like, some people would be like, you know what, fuck the baby, I'll hire a sitter to feed them. That's not my obligation right now. My obligation is like going to France and get this money. You know what I mean? So
Bone
he's kind of saying like,
538
Just one
donated
sec. Just one sec. Just one sec.
$199. Her very body embraces the duty to the child via the mammary glands.
That's
okay.
true.
Okay,
I think
Bona.
you should specify, do you mean like a legal duty or a moral duty?
I just said obligation first.
Yeah, do you mean legally or
Yeah, well,
morally?
that would be
or biologically.
first. I would need to figure out whether or not she even feels like she has any obligation, or doesn't actually know what the word obligation means. If
But
you don't actually
obligation
know
is
what the
subjective.
word,
There's
I
legal
want to ask you something
obligations.
else. If he pulls up the definition of obligation and reads it to you, will you answer the question then, or are you just going to still answer it the same way?
I will try my best.
Okay.
Do you want me to? I can Google obligation, right?
If that's what you want to do, Brian.
An act or course of action to which a person is morally or legally bound, a duty or commitment.
A duty.
Moral and legal.
Yeah,
So both.
Specify
There we go
legal or
again.
moral.
Right.
Specify for her which one.
A moral.
I feel
I
like
will
this is a
make
very
sure-
easy question.
Let's
to
just
say
say
No,
moral.
it's not. If you were to
matters.
ask me, are you obligated to be nice to the person next to you? I could say not
Okay.
necessarily.
Are you
But that's-
morally? Should you morally feed your child?
Yes.
Okay, good. So now back over to you. Do you have an obligation to feed your child?
I will make sure that my child is well
Are
fed.
you
No,
morally
just
obliged to do so?
Answer the question, Myra. Did I get it right? Mira?
Mira.
Sorry. So I'm not doing it. I swear I'm not doing it intentionally. I'm like that
Yes.
brain dead.
I will answer yes.
You have a obligation to do so.
Yeah, but it's not in front of other people. It's because I care for the child.
Okay, but there is a duty there.
Okay.
Okay,
There
so
is.
now we've established you know what duty means. So do you have any of those in society, or no?
Will I feed anyone else
That's
in the
not what
society?
I'm asking. I'm asking if you have any duties in society now that you understand the context of what duty means, or is it all just entitlement?
I feel like I can make certain difference in life that would be helpful to people, but I don't have to.
Okay, so you don't have any duties or obligations to anybody else in society, just a sequence of entitlements?
I don't know what sequence of entitlement is.
So, like, let's take a right. Would you say a right's an entitlement?
Can you be more specific? Can you give me like
Yeah, like your right to free speech for a context. That's an entitlement. Would you say you're entitled to that?
no?
No, you're not entitled to it.
I don't think anyone entitled to anything.
Nobody's entitled to anything
Yes.
except your baby to get food.
Yeah, but even there, like it's all very subjective. Like I would take care of the baby and feed the baby because I care for the baby.
Mm. But would you give a stigma towards people who didn't?
No,
Why?
because it's none of my business.
So if people weren't feeding their children and they were starving because they weren't feeding them, you wouldn't want a societal stigma against that.
I'm not there to judge. There are other people that can do
So
that.
do you think
It's
that
their
the
job.
world then is going to be a better place or a worse place because you refuse to judge and allow us to societal stigma towards people who won't feed their children?
This reminds me of my childhood.
I need to ask, do you all feel the same way?
Well, so a couple things. I feel like
I'm asking. I just want to finish this real
I'm
quick.
thinking, yes,
Yeah,
I'm thinking.
Is
I
the
could
world
get-
going to be a better or a worse place by you refusing to allow a stigma towards people who won't feed their own children?
So I think that the reason why this comparison doesn't work is because in the first case, the life of a child that is not able, I'm assuming, to feed himself or herself is a danger. And the second one, you're judging someone else's personal/sexual life.
I don't understand. Why wouldn't that work? We're talking about a stigma towards a behavior that we don't like to see the benefits in society due to the stigma.
Because like I said, the first one, someone's life depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that technically is not capable of feeding themselves. And the second case, it's...
What are you talking about?
I
You're
have
not
like a great
affecting
example.
anyone's
I'd love
health.
to ask her that maybe it could put it more specifically, like as an example,
Okay.
and not so much as a statement. So here we go. When I was a kid, my dad used to like beat the living fucking shit out of me for like 15 years. And one day, and I sang my entire life growing up. One day I was singing. I come outside. My neighbor's like, "Oh my God, you have such a lovely voice. Like, you're such a good singer. Like, never stop singing." And I feel really good, feel really great. And then 10 seconds later, I realized, wait, if she can hear me singing, she can definitely hear when I'm like screaming bloody murder for help. And no one's helping. And so I think in this, what his question could go towards this: if you were my neighbor, would have you felt obligated to call the police
do you have a
and
duty to do
CPS,
so?
or would you have said that's none of my business? I'm not going to get into that.
Actually, that's
Thank
really
you. This
that's a
was
good framing.
Yes, that is.
That was
Thank you
good
for
framing.
clarifying it. So I think I should have mentioned, maybe I did, but briefly, is that as long as nobody getting hurt, if no one's health or life is in danger, do what you please. Do not let others influence your life.
I mean, my biggest issue with what Andrew is saying that we can't be in an egalitarian society. I think I guess like if you want to go off of like what you only know, saying that men have always worked hard, they've been the laborers of America. But I think that if you look at the stats now, that men are no longer working and going to school. So I'm really curious as to how it can't be an egalitarian society if they're not putting in the the work that they used to.
Well, because
exactly what are they doing?
because it necessarily can't actually be equal because there's no equalization of force. Women will always have to depend on men to enforce their rights, and they'll always have to depend on men to enforce their well-being. They'll always have to depend on men to make the enforcement for all of the things that they want and desire for themselves. They can't enforce those things on their own. They need men to enforce them for them. And men do not need women to enforce their own rights. They do not need women to enforce their own agendas. They don't need women for any of that. But women necessarily need men to do that for them.
Could I say it like this, maybe, Andrew? At the core fundamental, the basis of society, you need men willing to do violence in order to protect the rights of other people.
Well, but it's not just that, though. So I want to be very clear with this. It's not just that you need to have aggressive men who are willing to conduct violence in order to keep a society together. It's that fundamentally women must depend on men to enforce their rights, period.
Got it.
Period. They have to. So egalitarianism, I think, even as a proposition, is false. I don't even think it's possible. I think from a foundational level, it's always going to be patriarchal due to this gap. And philosophers have talked about this for, basically 1,000 years. So have biblical theologians. And it's one of the huge gaps when you're talking about egalitarianism. How, for instance, Angela, how do you enforce your own personal rights absent men? Absent men collectively assisting you in doing that. How would you do that?
Well, I guess, in what state are we living in that we constantly need men to
anywhere you want. Any imaginary place that you even
I'm living
can
in
think
America
of.
with this great citizenship that I have. I don't have to constantly live in fear that someone needs to enforce my rights. I'm living happily fine. So I'm just curious. So we continuously go back to that, and we say that men need to be there to protect us from what? Other men?
Yes.
So is the issue is other men beating on other men? So this goes back to a men's issue.
Yes. So men give women rights and men give other men rights. That's correct.
Okay.
So because they're the enforcement arm, they are going to be the people who deliver rights to women or take rights away from women or deliver rights to men or take rights away from men. So men are always going to be the dominants in force, and so therefore they're always going to be the decider of who gets the rights. Can you think of an alternative system?
In this current, I'm sorry. So why are men failing in this current society?
They're not failing.
They're so failing.
How are they failing?
Yeah, but you just said you were safe, Angela, so I don't know that they're failing, right? I don't know if that's...
It's just right now, we the way that society works, we have a whole it's men don't do anything. It's the massive institutions that we've created around our countries that ensure rights. You don't get rights from men. You get rights from the protections that the institutions of government have guaranteed you, right? There are men in all sorts of different countries, but the rights that women have afforded to them dramatically vary from country to country, regardless of what man is going to protect them. You might have the strongest male defender ever in Afghanistan, but it doesn't mean you're going to college if you're a woman there. And also just when you compare country to country and you're looking for what are the most successful countries, it's not the ones with the most alpha men or the most manly men protecting the rights. It's generally you're looking for things like, do women have access to birth control, and are they participating in the economy? So I don't know. It's just it's a very crude argument.
Well, there's a bunch of things that are kind of smuggled in there, right? So the first thing is kind of smuggled in is you talk about institutions being the protectors of rights. Institutions are just a coalition of people, individuals. They're going to rely on the enforcement arm also of men. You say it's not masculine men who are defending these rights. However, it is masculine men who are in the military, in law enforcement, things like this, who are the enforcement arm of these rights, who these government institutions rely heavily on in order to enforce what their will is. So it always does come down to enforcement.
Do you think then that the countries where women have the most rights are the countries with the most masculine, strong men?
So they're not mutually exclusive or non-exclusive.
I didn't say they're mutually exclusive. I'm asking because you make it sound like it's just strong men that grant rights. So does that mean that if I were to look at all the women's rights in the world,
there's a problem there. There's a smuggling again where you say strong masculine men are the only ones doing them. I'm just saying men is the default are the ones who are doing this.
Wait, but why you say men are the default? We can run that back a little bit more reductively. Shouldn't it be 6 feet or taller men? Don't all men that are 5'8" and lower get their rights from men that are 6 feet and taller?
No.
Why not?
Because they don't have a non-equalization on force. A 5'8" person can defend themselves against a 6-foot person.
In general, do you think that's true?
I think that there are some advantages, but if you're going to do that, then on average,
no, not some advantages. I'm saying on average, if we look at combat sports with no weight classes, do you think 5'8" men are defending?
Well, hang on. So if we're going to use averages, then let's use averages and say that we have an average for a reason because most men are inside of that average. right? So if that's true, then most of the men who would be falling in these jobs are going to be within that average, Destiny. So
Sure,
who
but
cares?
I'm just asking if we run this all the way back. So any man that's below the average height, any man that's 5'9" or lower, their rights are also being defended by men that are 6'2" and taller.
Well, no, that wouldn't be a direct correlate for equalization because men who are
Why
6
not?
foot, because men who are 6 foot, there's far fewer of them than men who are in the average aggregate. So therefore, the force equalization is different. However, if you're looking at the force differential from men to women, the average is so lopsided that even weak men can generally defend themselves fairly well against strong women.
If you want to do force equalization there, then shouldn't we be looking at people that prefer a heavily patriarchal society versus people that prefer a more egalitarian one? And the force equalization for women on the egalitarian one would be probably that most men would side with that over the ones that want the heavily patriarchal one?
Yeah, but that would go with my point, which is that men are the ones who are the rights givers.
But men aren't just the rights givers there, because a coalition of 5'9" and shorter men with women are probably going to defend rights more than a coalition of 6 foot plus alpha men.
But the distinction there is that you said it yourself, it would be a coalition of men and women, but it'll never be women. So it'll always have to be men.
And it'll never be 5'8" and lower men, I don't think,
no,
right?
it will always be. The default will always go to men. Men can always enforce their rights collectively.
Okay, so you just want to arbitrarily
cannot.
cut it off at just men, but not go into any of the delineations.
I just went
within
into
groups of
every
men,
delineation with you. Which one would you like to go into?
I mean, I already said it. I think that you could argue that taller men are the ones that run society, and shorter men only exist in society essentially at the behest of larger men, basically.
Yeah, but we just covered this. That's true. You could say that, but if you're looking at an average, then you're saying that the men who are outside of the average are fewer in number than the men who are in the average. So they're outnumbered. So I don't know what your point is.
I mean, it could be the slightly taller men could probably take on 1.5 shorter men. I'm sure we could find some average where 30% of men in society can run the other 70%.
And it's still
just
men.
like nobody looks at...
And it's still men.
Sure.
That's the point.
It is men, but now I'm going into height. But you want to go back on just the man, the fact that it's like the man thing. But again, and to go very broad, because now, I mean, I feel like we kind of see how ridiculous the argument is, and just like saying, just men, just men, just men.
I haven't heard you refute it.
Broadly speaking, right, it's hard to refute because it's almost unfalsifiable because you're talking about half the population of the planet, right? Like, how am I supposed to refute that men are important in guarding rights? There are no countries that exist without men. But when I try to think of like, well, what's the refutation of this? Here would be an interesting thing. Do the countries with the strongest men have the most rights? Not really, no. In fact, just the opposite. I remember hearing so many jokes about how because Russia is so masculine and manly that all the trans Ukrainian soldiers were going to be getting murdered by the brave Russian soldiers. And here we've got drone operators, tossing grenades on Russian troops blowing themselves, right? So it doesn't seem to be the case that like just strong men are the predictor of rights.
So hang on, wait a second.
Go for it.
So men can take your rights away in those other countries too?
No, not just men. Those countries can take your rights away. You need a whole
using
institution.
The enforcement arm of who? Which sex do you think's the enforcement arm?
Countries are powered by men and women. When the Soviet Union beat
is the enforcement
Nazi
arm?
Germany, when the Soviet, it's not just about the enforcement arm. Who's giving them the arms to enforce?
Usually other men.
Who manufactures the guns? Who
The
manufactures?
Men. Do you think that there's female gun makers all over the world or what?
Yeah,
bro?
who do you think was working production in World War II when all of our men were going overseas?
They weren't designing the guns. They were literally on an assembly line putting a fucking screw in a fucking piece of metal. They weren't designing weapons. What world do you live in?
That's great. And at the end of the day, both jobs matter. You could be the best engineer in the world. If you don't have somebody building your shit, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, that's
right?
nice. Women can be a labor force if men allow them to. That's fantastic.
Sure. And what I'm saying, you can say if men allow them to, however you want to say it or whatever, but the reality is at the end of the day, it's not just men, right? You need both halves of society working together to actually fucking accomplish anything. So there is no society or country that's like...
You're smuggling in just men, again. You're smuggling in just men. What I'm saying to you specifically is that men are the enforcement arm, and nobody's building shit if men say no. That's what I'm saying. Women aren't going to be able to go to men and say, no, you know what? We're going to do it anyway if men don't want them to, Destiny. That's the distinction.
Well, I disagree with what you're saying because I understand what you're saying. It sounds great on paper, but if we again look at the stats right now, the suicide rates are up. Men are dying. Men aren't going to school. They've dropped out of school during COVID.
Yeah, but hold on, Angela. The point of the patriarchy wasn't
ahead.
to just do the point of the what do you say in the patriarchy? It wasn't that all men do better. Because I've heard this argument before. Yes, men are going to commit suicide more because there's men at the bottom of society that are not benefiting from this patriarchy. Right? Does that make sense? So I've heard the argument before, but like the idea that men are suffering isn't really the reason why the patriarchy isn't working. It's like the point he's trying to make is Andrew's guys, tell me if I'm wrong here. Andrew's trying to say that the foundation of society, there are men who have to enforce and to take certain jobs that have to do with military, law enforcement, etc. And what Destiny is saying is that while that is a part of society, and probably a more important part of society in the past, today it's a less important society because we have technology, because we have, someone who's a computer programmer, doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman, people can be successful entrepreneurs and be men or women. And I totally understand both parts of those. But my issue, the initial thing that I was saying before, was that because men generally are more aggressive, they're going to fill more parts of that society, being entrepreneurs, being CEOs of companies, being in the U.S. military, being bodyguards, and stuff like that. So,
I think
so
that.
Go ahead, Angela. Sorry.
No, sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, I hear everything you guys are saying, but this all sounds like it's just like labor force jobs. But meanwhile, like the society is thriving off of multiple things that doesn't require you to just be like a fucking barbarian. So I don't understand why we continue to go back to the state of mind.
Because both things are important. Because both things are important,
but it's completely just highlighted the fact that it's only men. But if you really look at it, women are thriving in it. Women are working more. 7.2 million men aren't working. So what are those men doing that they're contributing to the patriarchy that's so important that men can't enforce those guys who aren't working, who aren't doing shit? So I'm confused.
Wait a second. Women are only able to work in modernity the way that they are because men maintain the entirety of the infrastructure inside of every single nation on the planet. Women do not maintain infrastructure. Their top jobs are teaching, serving, things like this. They don't work in infrastructure. They don't work in paving the roads. They don't work with the air conditioners. They don't work with the electricity. They don't work with any of these things. At a very low scale do they work in any of these industries. The scales are so lopsided that you almost can just take the women out because they're so irrelevant to most of these industries. So the thing is I got to ask you, like you say, women are doing all these great things. It's like they're all enabled by the patriarchal system, which literally has men competing with men, which we're supposed to be doing, and we love to do that for status, for all of these different things. But the entirety of the world that you live in currently, that women are thriving in, all of it is maintained by men, and very little of it is maintained by women.
Do you think that in a society without men, women couldn't do these things? Like you're picking the most, not to sound mean, but like you're picking like the bottom. These are the bottom men of society. These are not to be mean, but these are the bottom of the
electricians are the bottom of society. That's interesting.
Shout out to the U.S. Army.
I'm sorry. Electricians are building the roads.
I said the infrastructure, and yes, they are building the
electricians are building the most, and also yes, electricians are trade jobs would go underneath college jobs. If you want to compare them to
why would they go underneath?
What's our Malagate award?
Why would they go underneath? Hold on. Well, they're underneath because they require less training and they pay less.
They don't require less training.
They, by definition, require less training.
Then show me the definition where college degree means less training than a trade degree.
Because typically trades are something that you can train into in a shorter period of time than a more specialized college degree level job.
In fact, to go from a journeyman to a master takes many, many, many years of training, Destiny.
You're comparing a master. We're not talking about a 4-year degree grad holder as being a master. Who do you think makes more money, a master software engineer or a master electrician or carpenter?
Well, it depends on what the electrician is doing. If they're a master electrician, for instance, and they're working inside of a nuclear silo, I think that they're probably making a lot of fucking money.
Okay, if they're a master software engineer, their name is Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, he's going to make a lot of money, but that's an exception to the. Now Zuckerberg, does he have a college degree? Didn't he drop out of college?
You're saying on exception, you think people in the trades make more money than people with college degrees?
If they're men. Yeah, often they do. Yes, that's correct.
Often they do. I'm asking on average.
Catching up. It's definitely catching up because what's happened is the labor force is not really. There's a lot of men out there that are not working, and we had Waller on our show, Justin Waller, and he talks about like when he has union people that come on to work on some of his building sites, his construction sites. Those guys, he would take those over a master's degree 100 times out of 100.
From a mandatory place. I mean, I see your point.
I don't.
What about the truth?
No, I think the truth is great. I think, absolutely. Everyone should know the truth. But I think it's going to be terrible for the children if the truth is revealed.
You're in favor.
That's what I'm saying.
With
the way a lot of women are moving nowadays, they're like a lot of children aren't going to be having dads anymore.
So it would be bad for women, but you don't object to paternity testing.
No, not at all. I'm for it.
So you acknowledge. Okay, I see. Are you in favor of that, Andrew? It sounds like.
Oh yeah, I think that the rates of paternity which are lied about is wildly understated. And yeah, absolutely. I think that if mandatory paternity testing was done, there would be significant problems for women, but the kind of problems that I think they should see, which is responsibility. Forever inside of human society, men did not have this.
Right.
We'd never had the luxury of we had to always take the word of the woman as to paternity. We don't have to do that now, and we absolutely shouldn't do it now. And even if it's not mandatory, everybody should get one no matter what, always. Period.
And just
of course. And I have 100. I have what I would consider 100% faith and trust in my wife. Mm-hmm. But I told her, I told her these words exactly. You're going to get the fucking test, and if not, I'm out the door. Period.
Well, also, that's not emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Well, there also
emotional abuse.
That would be considered emotional abuse. Exactly.
How is that 100% trust and faith? I mean, it's your prerogative to do that. But
okay, well,
it's not for her. It's for me.
Yeah. Well, it's also there are also cases where like the hospital will jumble up babies.
No, it's not.
It's as much trust as I can give you.
Trust.
It's as much trust as I can give.
Yes, because you can't confirm that. There's no way for a man to confirm that.
That's not trust.
Well, where's the trust back the other way? Just being like, okay, yeah, no problem.
Wait, Andrew.
If there was ever any resistance,
that's how that works. That's how trust works.
Yeah.
What is the what's the pitch to how would you say that? Because I feel like if I were to say that to a girl, I could see her like my wife or when I'm having kids.
What could she? What possible argument could a woman have towards asking you to get a paternity test other than it makes her feel bad?
If she's unfaithful.
Or like you don't trust
other than it makes her feel bad. What could the argument possibly be? Give me a single argument other than because it makes me feel bad. I want to hear it.
But why would you want to make her feel bad?
So that's I feel bad.
If you're worried that she'd be cheating on you, why would you even want to?
So that's I feel bad. It's really. I feel bad.
It's saying clearly we don't have a strong foundation. Sorry.
That's I feel bad.
No, it's not. It's saying we don't have a strong foundation.
Why would that matter if it didn't make one of them feel bad?
Because she could say like if we don't have a strong foundation of trust and faith.
Because it makes her feel bad.
No, she could feel neutral about it and still be like, oh, okay,
so
he
if
doesn't
she,
trust
so
me.
wait a second,
and maybe he's gonna be constantly
if she feels neutral about it, if she feels neutral about it, if she feels neutral about it, who cares?
Let her finish her point.
Say your point.
If she feels neutral about it, then who cares?
I'm saying if you don't have trust in a relationship, typically that will lead to a bad relationship, regardless if the parties in the relationship feel bad about it or not. That was my only point.
Yeah, but that's the only argument is feel bad.
No, it's not. I literally said it doesn't matter if they feel bad or not. She can object and say clearly we don't have a strong foundation.
38 donated $200. Love your hair, Maddie. GL with your marriage. Brian, love the Andrew Marathon. Shout out Crucible. Taking Faru as my wife. KTHX.
Okay, thanks. Yo, Bone Man, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Welcome. Good to see you back in the chat, man. Go ahead, Farah, with your point.
I completed it.
Yeah, so
she completed it.
The only reason that the trust variable is there is because it would make one feel bad over the other. That's it.
I don't know if
the
that's
only
true.
argument you would make for the trust is you don't trust me, and that what, Farah? You don't trust me, and that makes me.
But it doesn't have to make you feel bad.
Then why would it matter? Why would it matter?
It's the basis of a relationship.
It's a foundation relationship.
Because if it's not, and why is it a foundation?
Okay, what about this?
It's based on how people
maybe you don't care
feel.
or not. You're completely apathetic to whether your wife cheats on you, but maybe you still don't want her to do that, even if you have no emotional reaction to it, because you think that creates an unstable foundation for a relationship.
Then
even if you're completely apathetic and maybe you're a cuck and you get off to it.
Then why would you care about the paternity test? How would that be an argument if it's just a neutral?
You were saying, what is an objection to your boyfriend asking you for a paternity test? And I'm saying you could say, we're missing an important tenet of our relationship, an important pillar that isn't contingent on me feeling good or bad about it. That was my only point.
Then if you don't feel good or bad about it, why would it be an important pillar?
Same way I told you, maybe if your wife's cheating on you, but you don't necessarily care, wouldn't you agree that that could have adverse effects on the relationship, regardless about how you feel about it personally?
Those would be like the adverse effects that you would be talking about, are like her getting pregnant.
No, not necessarily.
Her giving you a VD.
Even if she was infertile.
Her giving you VD.
What is that?
Venereal disease.
I don't think those would be your only objections to your wife stepping out on you.
I think how that makes you feel, then I don't understand the objective.
You're religious. From your Christian purview, you could probably outline a plethora of reasons for why you wouldn't want your girlfriend or wife to be sleeping with other people, other than it makes you feel bad. You'd probably think it, has adverse outcomes.
Yes, that's
on the
true. I
relationship.
could appeal to an objective standard. Yes.
Yes, and most people in relationships
what objective
appeal to
standard are you appealing to?
Usually the tenets of trust in a relationship.
That's not an objective standard, it's a subjective standard.
Most relationships subscribe to that. Obviously, people can deviate from that. But
that's a subjective standard. And at the end of the day, the only reason you appeal to that subjective standard is because if I don't trust you and you don't trust me, one of us feels bad.
I just told you there's many instances where you might not feel
bad.
There's
not a single one of those that doesn't really boil down to it made the other person feel bad.
And so Neil and Pin didn't feel bad. He just disagrees.
No, you even created a hypothetical neutral. So you said hypothetically, what if neutrally it didn't make you feel bad for your wife to go out and do this thing? What would be her objection?
Okay, what if I found out my husband cheated on me and I genuinely have zero emotional reaction to it, but I still want to dump him? Did I dump him because it makes me feel bad or because I feel like we don't have a strong foundation because there's dishonesty and there's a lack of trust?
I don't understand. Why do you want the honesty and the trust inside of the relationship if you don't care if he cheats?
It's not about don't care. I can care without it making me feel bad.
Yeah, but okay, so you care, but it doesn't make you feel bad?
That could happen, yeah.
How?
You can't control your emotional response to something. Maybe you find out someone cheats on you, or you found out your husband, texted another girl, and you're like, okay, this violates my boundaries.
And you would care about that because it makes you feel bad.
People have boundaries that aren't always directly, purely correlated to their feelings about it.
Oh, really? So if guy is texting and you don't care, that means...
It's not about don't care. It maybe doesn't make me feel bad.
Oh, if it doesn't make you feel bad, then you don't care, right?
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
No.
So you care if a guy's texting another person even if it doesn't make you feel bad?
I would still care. Even if in that moment I felt apathetic about it, I would still end the relationship. Even if I personally didn't cry about it.
Even though you didn't care?
Even if I didn't cry about it or
Why
feel
would you
sad
do
or
anything?
insecure.
Why would you do anything at all if you didn't care?
Right.
That makes no sense. That's the stupidest thing I've heard out of you tonight. Why would you do anything if you didn't care?
Because reversely, I wouldn't set boundaries purely based on how I feel about it. So for instance, if I was overly jealous about my husband having a female coworker, I wouldn't then say, quit your job because this makes me feel bad. So it goes both ways.
But that's something you care about.
Okay, but
yes, it's both ways.
I get what you're saying, but hypothetically what you're saying is you can have values without having emotion tied to those values.
Yes. And typically they are correlated, but not always. So the same way I can, value honesty and trust, and maybe I have a visceral reaction to you having a female coworker, and that could be irrational. So I'm not going to deduce my boundaries from my emotions, and likewise, I'm not going to always deduce my emotions from the boundaries.
Where does that actually happen, especially in the context of a relationship?
Yeah, the distinction
a husband having a female coworker?
Well, the distinction here is still care.
Me feeling irrationally jealous about my husband having a female coworker, it happens every day.
The distinction here is care. So what you're doing
irrationally.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, man. Sorry.
What?
You said irrationally. You feeling
That was my whole point. I can have rational boundaries and standards that don't always correlate to whether I feel good or bad. Because people feel bad all the time about things that are irrational, such as your husband having a female coworker.
Yes.
So I wouldn't then say, don't do this thing because it makes me feel bad. So that was my whole point.
Yes, you can. I'm saying you can't in this context. So with the problem that you made with this particular hypothetical, when you reverse it, you introduce care. And I'm saying, fine, you can introduce care. It works in that hypothetical. The opposition hypothetical doesn't, because I'm claiming that any of the standards that you would appeal to for why you would not take that test are going to appeal to care and therefore feel bad.
I disagree, and I already laid it out.
Nope, you gave me a hypothetical where you just reintroduced the word care again. And said, in this case, if I did care, then blah, blah, blah.
I was saying people set boundaries in relationships that are completely disparate from whether they feel good or bad. So same way, again, I may feel bad if my husband has a female coworker. I'm not going to then say you can only work with men or you can only go to an all-male gym.
Yes.
And likewise, I might say, don't text other girls and don't sex other girls, but whether I break up with you isn't going to be contingent on whether when I find out, I cry about it or not.
No.
Because
why don't you wait? Whether you cry,
disrespect is maybe the variable here.
Yeah, before you even cry about it, why did you set the standard to begin with?
Because of certain values in the relationship.
Because things you care about.
That's what I was saying.
Care about, but not feel good or bad. You said whether it just hurts her feelings.
How could you care about it if you don't feel good or bad about it?
I just explained how.
No, you really didn't. In this context, that doesn't work. Why would you set the standards if you didn't care about the standards because you felt good or bad about the standard?
Because I could think there's certain. Shut up. I could think there's certain pillars. Sorry. I could think there's certain pillars that breed a stronger relationship, regardless of whether or not I personally feel good or bad about it. And I know you agree with that.
Why do you care about the stronger pillar?
Because I want a strong relationship.
Because you care about it?
Because you value the relationship. You wanted to have...
Because you care about it.
I didn't say care wasn't a variable. I said feeling good or bad.
And I'm saying you can't have the feel good or bad. If you care about something, you have to have the feel good or bad.
I gave you an example in which you don't. That doesn't have to be the case with the coworker.
No, you actually didn't. What you do in that example is you just say, yes, in that case, for care, I do feel good or bad, and then I set reasonable boundaries. But
no, I said you don't. You don't deduce the boundaries from feeling good or bad.
I think you do.
Nobody does that.
Everyone does that.
Everybody does it.
Every jealous wife says you can't work with other women.
No. But the reason that they would say that or not say that is because they care about it. And so, therefore, the fact that they care about it is why they set the boundary for good, or it makes me feel good or it makes me feel bad because I care about it.
Yeah, the emotion is going to be present.
No, because I'm saying they still feel bad about it, but they still let their husband work with other women because they realize that's not going to have adverse outcomes on the relationship. Yes, but that doesn't mean they don't feel bad about it. The reason they could still feel bad about it and allow it, but they still feel bad. I know you see my point.
And I'm saying that from your perspective, in this particular case, why shouldn't a man or why shouldn't a woman take the paternity test if a man asks her to, other than, I feel bad that you asked me to do that?
And I told you why. Her feelings are regardless of the fact that maybe she wants to have a strong pillar of having trust and faith in the relationship. Same way, maybe I don't personally feel good or bad if my boyfriend says, share your location with me. But maybe I'll say, like, okay, but if you don't trust me, then this probably isn't going to be like a sustained relationship for a long period of time.
And, okay, the word trust there, doing a lot of heavy lifting for your point. So I feel like you wouldn't trust. Hang on, let me finish. I just let you talk.
No, I just want to say I'm not even disputing the fact or like of requesting a paternity test. You were just asking what are some other objections.
Yeah, but
I think it's your prerogative to ask.
But even in that, you're using the word trust there. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting for your argument. Am I to assume that you care about trust then?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I never said care is not a variable. I said feeling good or bad.
Stop. Why would you care about the trust? Why would you care about the trust?
Because having a strong sense of trust in a relationship leads to a healthier relationship, regardless of whether I feel good or bad. So even though I may feel bad about the fact that my husband has a female coworker, if I have a strong sense of trust, that takes precedence over my feelings of good or bad.
Yeah, okay. Forget the absent analogy. Inside of your relationship, without qualifiers, right? Without going, just like just answer this single question.
What's so funny, Brian?
Just answer this single.
No, Brian, tell me what's so funny.
No, Farah, answer this single. Just answer this single question. Trust inside of this hypothetical. Okay, inside of your own hypothetical.
The paternity one, or
the paternity one, which is doing all the heavy lifting here. The word trust there implies you care. We agree, right?
That you care about trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you care about the trust because if you can't trust the other person, right, it would elicit a negative feeling in you? No. Okay.
Wow.
And there's nothing I can do.
Nothing he can do. There's nothing.
What do you mean, wow? Do you have a rebuttal?
It doesn't make sense.
It literally does.
System or a bunch of people trying to stay in power, as much as it is the way that humans actually interact with each other, because we're distinct, ontologically different creatures.
Would you say that it's maybe like a better description? Because there were matriarchies. It was just like patriarchies consistently outcompeted.
There really weren't ever matriarchies. There were matriarchs, but they really, all of their force conditions for the monopoly on force were still upheld by men.
So this isn't totally true. What we actually see when you go back to like Paleolithic eras of like Homo sapiens is that patriarchy was just more effective at like coordinating war efforts. Like they just killed everyone else.
In Paleolithic societies especially, what you mostly see are chiefs, and you see men who are high-level men. You don't see matriarchs.
So you did. The problem is that you didn't. You did.
Where?
Okay.
Name a culture.
I actually don't know the names of any Paleolithic culture specifically.
But you do know that there was matriarchs in them.
Absolutely. So like if you go, so there's a really good book I'd recommend. It's called Sapiens. It's by Yuval Harari, and it tracks basically the evolution of like Homo sapiens psychology specifically. Because we need to understand that, like, for example, a secular argument for Abrahamic religions is that it's been, bar none, the most evolutionarily successful at setting up the best societies ever, which is why it's the most dominant thing. It's not this like crazy evil thing. The same thing with patriarchies. It's reasonable to presume, especially when you get into like these lost tribes and we do see matriarchies, not as often, but often enough, that there were lots of matriarchies, but the reality is that the patriarchy was fundamentally a more competitive organizational system.
Let's grant for a second that even that's true. that there was matriarchies within Paleolithic societies. Okay, I'll grant you for the sake of argument. In recorded history, of which there's about 7,000 years, there could be some things pre that, but we had like the Library of Alexandria burned down, so we don't know. We lost a lot. Okay, so we don't really know how far back it goes. Since this is true, and we only can go back about 7,000 years, if you look at that record, there's not really any matriarchies anywhere.
I agree. I would say like it seems to be the case that like when tribes were just forming to a space where they were like family competitors against one another, that seems to be where matriarchy dominantly lost.
Yeah, so then
I just want to be clear that like
matriarchies
aren't inherently biological. Like patriarchy isn't inherently biological. It's just more competitive.
If since the conditions have existed for societies, actual societies, the way that we understand them, which is not tribal throw spirit things anymore. It hasn't been for thousands of years. We've had the coalition of societies. We have not seen that formula. What we've seen instead is a strong patriarchate everywhere in the world, basically at all times.
Sure, but
basically
the
always.
Is a lot less masculine than we like to act like it is in many ways. Like this is actually one of my biggest frustrations with feminists when they talk about patriarchy, is that the most successful patriarchies were patriarchies that could socially organize large groups of people, and they did so through the inventions of state and the inventions of things like religion. These are fundamental to coordinating people beyond 250 bodies.
I don't understand how that's not masculine.
Because social coordination and social cohesion and like making social groups work is almost always attributed to being a feminine trait.
No, it's not. Of course it isn't.
In literature,
no, it's not. Listen,
who's organizing the home?
Who's organizing corporations? Who's in charge?
It is men.
Who's in government?
Yeah.
All of these are all orders for social organization.
Exactly, because men are allowed to be feminine, and feminine and masculine traits are both necessary for flourishing societies.
You're saying that you're only assigning it as being feminine, even though when we're looking at the historic record, it doesn't seem like it's feminine at all. It seems like it's a very much a masculine trait to be able to do mass organization, especially of other men. A thing of which you almost never see women do.
Or masculine?
Organization? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It could be a neutral, but I think that
people together.
I think the way it's done is masculine or feminine. I think that the way women could do it through forms of manipulation, backstabbery, secret telling.
There's no way that women could do it in like a neutral to positive way.
They can, but it's not often done that way.
I mean, that's not true. If we look at family lines,
it is true.
Who's that one that like everyone goes to? When grandma dies, the family's fucked because she was like the main person coordinating these things.
Unless
they come from a long line of strong women, right?
But sometimes
women are often social coordinators. Who's most HR?
But we're talking about in society. You're giving these little tiny outliers for individual family units. We're talking about the majority of society, the majority of human history that's recorded.
Men rose to the top in all things.
The majority of societies were completely and totally organized by men.
And
not only were they organized by men, but the way in which they were organized, which was with kind of the cracking of the whip, right? Here's what the Spartan warriors are going to do. Here's what our army's going to do.
If you think that it was just the cracking of the whip, then you have a really bad understanding of how
I'm not saying it was just anything. I'm giving you an example of how this is definitely not a feminine trait.
Because I feel like we're disagreeing on something that we don't need to. Is it not possible that most of the patriarchies, which were dominantly run by men, because men tend to be more extreme at most things, incorporated both feminine and masculine traits, even though it was still a patriarchy?
No, I wouldn't. I don't think so. I think that even here, kind of the semantic distinction needs to be made. No, I don't think that organization in mass of society is a feminine trait, and I don't know how you could convince me that it is.
Okay, because we would talk about like the fundamental traits. If organization and social cohesion and empathy are dominantly, well, like you can apply it to masculinities if you want. I don't give a fuck. All this stuff is like socially made and socially organized.
Yeah.
But when we look back at history, when like literature talks about like the social cohesion agent or the organizing agent, it's oftentimes the women. They're given like nurturance role. They're given in like collection and like organization roles. That's why even in our society we see women. Hold on, you gotta let me finish. This is why even in our society, what do you see like dominating HR? One of the most important human organization groups.
I gotta push back again. I think that what you're talking about here is support roles. So yes, women are great in support organizational roles, but here's what they're not great at. They're not great quartermasters. They're not great equipment masters. They're not great at organizing armies. They're not great at any of that. What they are great is at smaller tasks like paymasters, organizing for food, organizing for cookware, things like this, though before we could organize women to do cooking, basically the Roman legions would go around and actually collect food themselves. But what I'm saying to you is that no, I think that for smaller tasks, for support tasks, yes, nursing, things like this. But I think that when it comes to the overarching society and how it's organized, yeah, I would say that it's definitely masculine. Same thing, churches, organized societies in a big way. You cited that yourself.
Sure.
Those were basically always run by men everywhere.
Sure. What do you think my position is?
Well, I think that you're trying to say that organization is a feminine trait.
Okay. Do you know the rest of my take with that, or is that the main part?
Well, I mean, this is what we're arguing over.
Sort of. We're arguing about masculinities and femininities. That's what we're talking about.
But you're saying that mass organization is more of a female or a feminine trait.
No, I didn't say mass organization. I said organizing people based on social structures is dominantly more feminine. It seems to be a more feminine trait not because women do it more often. It's exclusively. Do you know what the word arete means? I'm sorry if I'm being super nerdy, and it's okay if you don't. It's like a really obscure word. Okay, arete was this concept in the Greek that was like, it's this idea of like the most important cultural value. And the way that we tend to like look at cultures is by what their literature writes about. When you look at the literature when it comes to like social connection, social organization, and social glue factors, typically that the literature that our society is based on puts women in that role dominantly. Whereas things like protectiveness, leadership is often where men, that would be something that we would call a masculinity.
Yeah, but the leadership and mass organization, this is exactly what I'm saying, in fact. So you're talking about minor support rules for organization. You're talking about things like nursing and childcare, things like this.
No.
But when you're doing actual organization of men...
I'm talking about forms.
Which forms?
I'm talking about like platonic forms.
Yeah, but why would you say platonic forms and then look at modern civilization? That's what you just cited.
Okay. Sorry, I think I lost you there. When I'm saying I'm looking at platonic forms, you're saying like, yeah, but women do this role. And I'm saying that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the emergent themes that societies ascribe to masculinity versus femininity.
And I'm telling you that those themes in line with masculinity definitely have to do with the roles of leadership, massive armies and the organization of those massive armies, the organizations of churches, the organizations of building of infrastructure, the organizations of all of these things.
This is not masculinities. These are not forms. These are things that men are doing in the patriarchy. When we're talking about masculinity, we're talking about character traits typically. We're talking about things like protectiveness, leadership, aggression. Assertiveness is typically associated with masculinity, whereas with femininity, it's typically empathy, right? Nurturance. These are things that are attached to each of these concepts.
You can pop these with like, this is how I attribute these things. Fine. But what I'm saying is that as a matter of record, it is not the case that women really are the ones organizing anything in society. So if that's just the point that you want to add that as a feminine trait, fine. I'll concede it just to move the conversation on.
That's literally my own point.
But when it's mapped onto reality, that is not what we see.
Men are always in the leadership, and they always tend to be more extreme.
So when we go back to the point then, and we're talking about when the men feels bad and the woman feels bad, and how women and men both, interact with how men and women feel bad. You can see why there'd be a distinction for how women judge men and how men judge men.
Oh, for sure.
And why that would be necessary that men do show a bit less emotion, probably a lot less emotion. That also, one thing I found here in this podcast, every single episode I've watched, this question usually gets asked. Do you want a more dominant man or a less dominant man? And you know what they all say? I want a more dominant man. And I want him to show less emotion. And I want him to show more leadership, which is what you were saying. Yeah. And more virtues, which is what you were saying. That's what they all say.
Sure. And I would agree with basically all of that. The point that I was trying to make is what tends to make people, like when we look at the most respect-worthy people, I'm not sure if there's any
opening statement, that I do think that there are meaningful differences between the sexes, and that obviously gender is something that's come out of sex, right? We I've heard Andrew even say that, gender is something that in other debates, that gender is something that was kind of informed by sex at a certain point. But as somebody who's kept up with modern society, and I still maintain the importance of etiquette and also understand the repercussions of not affirming somebody's identity, I tend to prefer to affirm people's identity.
So you think that we should lie to be polite, is what you're saying?
I mean, look, I don't. Here's an example, okay? I personally don't believe in a God, right? I'm not going to go up to you and say, hey, guess what? Your God isn't real. Fuck your God, all of that, right? Maybe other people do that. shit, but that's not me. So yeah, there is a
well, so if people
there's
who
a
do
reason.
Just one second.
People
if you could
do
wrap
that.
It up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to ask.
Yeah,
if people
do that, if people do come after the Christian God, are they Christophobes? Is it Christophobia?
I mean, I think they're disrespectful. 100%.
That's not my question. Is it
Christophobia? I mean, you can say it. Sure, why not? Fuck it.
Yeah, why not? So I would say that if somebody is saying like all Christians are this type of person and that we need to do this or whatever, and that their God isn't real and they're useless in society, things like that. Like I would probably say, yeah, you know what they are.
You're totally loading it. The question specifically is just this, okay?
Yeah.
If somebody does not affirm that Christianity is true, are they Christophobic?
No.
No.
I don't think
then
so.
Then why isn't the true same for the transgender identity?
Because I specifically told you that you don't have to agree with transgender ideology. Right. Like you can choose to not believe in that.
That has nothing to do with the argument.
I don't think that not believing in it is transphobic.
That has nothing to do with the argument. If you make the statement that it's not Christophobia, it's not a phobia of Christianity, to say to them that to not affirm their identity is true. You just said that would not be Christophobia. How could it then be transphobia to refuse to affirm the identity?
Does it cause you material harm that other people don't believe in your religion?
Yes, but not only that, It's actually 1-to-1. It would be causing the same type of harm. What would be the distinction?
So it doesn't devalue you as an individual.
I think it does. It's all about how I feel.
That's ridiculous.
Nina.
What do you mean?
It's how I feel. Sure. It's not about what's real, right?
Okay, well,
it's how it's perceived.
Okay, so specifically, I did also say that saying a trans man is not male is not transphobic, in my opinion. So, like, with
then that's the end of the debate.
Isn't that the premise of the debate?
No, the difference is I specifically said saying trans men aren't men is probably transphobic.
Right,
saying trans men aren't male is probably not. No trans person is going to say that, or most trans people are not going to try and argue with you that they've changed their sex successfully. They know they haven't.
I don't understand. Let me be very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Are you claiming that if I do not affirm the identity, meaning lie, to a person you call a trans person?
Wait, no.
Let me finish the question, and then you can respond.
We'll give you a minute to respond on the other side.
Specifically, is it transphobic for me not to affirm a trans person's identity, or isn't it?
1 minute on the clock.
Why do you keep... Okay, well, this isn't going to be necessarily a response to your question, but I just don't like your...
You're going to ask a question to answer the question.
Lie.
Great. Perfect, Nina.
It's
no need to answer the question.
Premise of the debate.
Well,
right.
Well, no, it's not about a lie. It's just about, like, why are you thinking that, like, it's like...
Let me try one more time with the question.
No,
the question is it
you
transphobic for me
Christian,
to not affirm the identity of a trans person, or isn't it?
Oh my God.
Is it transphobic to not affirm the identity of a trans person, or isn't it? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Why is that not true for the affirmation of the identity of a Christian, or the affirmation of an identity of somebody who claims that they're black when they're actually white? Or any
I was
number
just going to actually ask you.
You would to some extent. Wait, hold on. You would
tell you guys. Sure.
Okay. Go ahead.
If I tell you guys, you know what? I've done a lot of searching. I've been to a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of psychotherapy, and I believe that I'm black. Would you guys feel that it's harmful not to affirm that if I believe that's my identity?
I would say that, if you grew up around Black culture, if you feel like you identify with Black culture, like, I don't know that I would call you Black, but I would say, you know what, you seem to be really ingrained in Black culture, right?
You wouldn't affirm her identity, Stardust?
No, I don't believe in trans.
I can't. But what kind of racist wouldn't affirm her identity, Stardust?
Yeah.
What kind of?
Look, I'm not going around saying that you guys aren't Christians, right? Like, I'm not saying that you guys aren't.
You said it's not
you
a phobia.
No, I didn't. No, that's not what it was.
My
You're changing
question,
it. You're changing your question.
I think
your
we need
question.
to do,
wait a minute. Your question was specifically if you say that my God isn't real, is that Christphobic? No, I don't think that's Christphobic. If I go around and say that you guys are not Christians, you guys are not real Christians, then yes, possibly that could be.
Why would that be Christphobic, but the alternative would not be? What is the criteria? What is the junction breaker?
What you're claiming is you're claiming that your identity as a Christian. I am denying your identity as a Christian.
Yeah. Just through my perception. Just through my perception, you're denying it. It doesn't have to map onto reality. It only has to map through the perception. So is it Christophobia through or not?
I would say it's anti-Christian. Yeah, it's probably anti-Christian to say that, hey, you know what? You say you're Christian, but I don't believe you.
So then is it anti-white to say that race doesn't exist?
No, not really. We have things that are social constructs all the time, right? But money doesn't really exist. We made it.
It does. There are pieces of paper which reflect reality. That's the non-social construction.
We still made that up.
Stop. The argument of what is the social construction portion of money and what is the physical portion of money, okay, that needs to be clarified. There is a physical portion of these things which does map onto objective reality. Then there's a social construction aspect to it as well, like a school. That is still a building. The social construction aspect would be the school, right?
So yes, what I would say is like money. Yes, we have like hard money. We can look at it. It's a real thing, but that real thing still came out of the social construction of it.
What I'm trying to clarify is what is the social construction aspect versus what is the physical aspect of the actual thing that maps on to reality. In this particular case, the only thing that maps on to reality is the biological sex. The thing that does not map on to reality is the social construction, which you call gender. You say that it's transphobic to not affirm the identity of a person, but cannot give me a threshold breaker for any other specific identity.
No, yeah, I have given you. I've said that, yeah, if I'm going around denying your identity as a Christian, then yeah, that would probably be bigoted.
So if you say,
can I jump in
a
here
Satanist
really
isn't a real Christian?
Again, it's a little bit to repeat something Stardust did bring up, of course, but like, do you think that if I were to deny the fact, like, I am acting like I know more about your religious beliefs than you, and saying like, no, you're not actually Christian. Like, do you think that wouldn't be like a problem? Like, that's more analogous in my mind. Is somebody saying like, oh, you're not this, like, you're not this, you can't be this. Like, I don't know what you feel. Well, I don't know what your beliefs are. I don't know how your internal mindset is. Like, I don't think that would be fair at all.
Aren't we talking about biological reality?
I'm almost done. Okay, but unfair for me to say when it comes to like the way that you interpret yourself and your identity as being a Christian. I don't think I should have the right to say like, I mean, not like to say it, but like,
well, let's test
it's kind of a piece of shit move to do.
Let's test and see if that's true.
A piece of shit move if I were to tell you, oh no, you're not Christian.
Let's find out, Nina. Let's find out if that's actually true, Nina. Okay, so here, we'll just test this with a quick hypothetical. Let us assume that there was a woman who pretended her entire life to be black, but she wasn't actually black, right? And let's say that she had like some prominent Democrat position of some kind.
What is she, like classic in like blackface or what?
This fictitious woman who never existed, right? And then let's assume that it was found out that she was not actually African American in any way, shape, or form, and that she was just LARPing as being one. But she said that she had the lived experience of one, and so therefore should be considered a black person, regardless of the fact that she wasn't. And the entirety in mass of black people came out and said, no, you're not black. Are they all being racist by not accepting her identity, Nina?
Well, you asked a few different things there. Are you trying to seem more like it's like, okay,
I asked one thing.
I don't know that person's position. I'm not going to assume that. Like, that just is not really something that I feel like
he's talking about Rachel Dolezal, who pretended to be black so she could get a position at the head of the NCAA.
Okay, cool.
Think,
people do
right?
dumb shit.
You know, and she got appointed to all these Black activist groups and organizations, and it turned out that she had been putting cornrows in and spray tanning herself and pretending to be of African American descent when she never was. She's like white as I am, right? And so she was fired from those jobs. She was completely ousted by the Black community. Does that make the Black community racist against her? Does it mean they are being phobic against her if they say, no, you cannot adopt our identity and claim it when that's not your biological reality?
Well, it seems that person was just doing that for some sort of like tangible benefit.
That doesn't answer the question.
Wait a minute. Though, okay,
well, I don't remember the story
what about,
well. It's
what about a trans man? So the whole premise of the debate is it transphobic to say a trans man is not a real man? What if a trans man is pretending? How do you know that person isn't pretending to be a man? Because let's say they believe in the patriarchy and that the patriarchy gives men unfair advantages like you think it does. Why should that? How do we know that woman isn't pretending to be a man so that she can get the benefits that our society gives to men?
That's what I'm saying. Your example of Rachel Dolezal is seemingly like it's already been proven that they were using that for the.
It never really was proven. It was assumed. But the contention from the Black community was just like, we don't care what your.
They said you're not black.
We don't care what your motivations are. You cannot say you are biologically a Black person, just like a woman cannot say she's a man.
Answer to the question. No, don't interject.
Let
her answer.
They were biologically Black. Like, what does that even mean?
We're asking the question again. I'm going to make it as simple as I possibly can for you.
Yeah, but you can't be.
Was it racist for the Black community to say you're not Black? Was that racist of them?
Was it racist for them to just say that you're not Black? I mean,
were they causing her harm by refusing to affirm her chosen identity?
You have no idea.
I don't know enough about this story that you're referring to.
Okay, in a fictitious story, I didn't even bring up Rachel Dolezal, but fictitiously, if it maps on the same exact way in this hypothetical, okay, and they all say every Black person in the United States, every single one of them says, no, you're not Black. Are they being racist for not affirming her identity, Nina?
I don't believe in transracialism, like whatsoever.
Not asking you. I'm asking Nina to please answer my question.
Yeah, that's
Nina.
not really like I think we're a little bit too far off base.
Answer my question, Nina. Stop running.
Why would I answer this question? I don't think it applies.
You can't answer the question.
You're asking me to ask a metaphor of every single fucking Black person would agree with like calling.
Yes,
her
I know hypotheticals are designed to test logic. They're really hard.
What you're trying to imply that every single Black person has the exact same opinion?
Yes, well, Nina, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I don't think that it's racist.
How would you feel this morning if you never had breakfast, Nina? How would you feel?
Self-made choice. I didn't go to my dad and be like, should I do this? And he just gave me like all this advice to do it. I came to them, told them because I wanted to be honest with my parents. They have that reason, they have that decision to make with their kid if they do something like this. You know what I mean? Like whether they want to be in your life or not. I think it's bad parenting if you don't want to be in your kid's life, no matter what they do. I'm not saying if they like delete someone, that's a great, I don't know. I feel like the line is just too broad here.
So let me ask you this. How can you make the judgment and the value-added judgment on what's bad parenting? I have children. Do you have any?
No.
Okay. And then on top of it, from your parents' perspective, you turned out to go off and do OnlyFans and like show your butthole online for money. How's that great parenting? How could you come to me and say what a great parent should do is this? You're the perfect example of everything that nobody should listen to for great parenting.
Is Christ a terrible parent because like so many of his sons and daughters commit sin? You said Jesus is your example for parenting. Who did Jesus dine with?
This is a hilarious
Who did he dine
argument.
with?
Of course he died for everybody.
No, who did he dine with?
Like eat.
Dine. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Who did he dine with?
In which context? Like his apostles
Matthew,
or when?
In the Gospels. Who did he dine
he would dine with everybody. He dined with sinners. He would dine with
saints.
Who
did he call godless fools and rejected outright?
Okay, just stop.
Who?
Just get to your point.
You should know this.
Well, it's fine if you don't know this.
Should I?
The people he called godless fools was Pharisees, the leaders of the religion.
Okay.
Whereas in the cases of women who were adulterers, tax collectors,
the ones he told
lepers,
to sin no more.
He told them to sin no more,
sin
but
no
he
more.
still dined with them.
And he told them to sin no more. He said, "Go and sin no more."
But disowning is not the same thing as saying sin no more.
Disowning until a behavior is modified.
No.
That's behavior modification.
No, it's not.
How do you? Oh,
there's a million ways to not. Hold on. There's a million ways to condone an action. How do you even reconcile the prodigal son when the father, as the son walks home, says, "You've been my son the whole time." He never removed it. The son left, and the father allowed him to live out the consequences of that. But the father didn't disown him.
First of all,
the father didn't send him away, and when he came back, he threw him a massive party.
Yes, the parable, the parable prodigal son. But here's the thing: when you're looking at what happened in the results of the prodigal son, the father did not go where the son was committing all these heinous acts.
We're not saying
stop.
We're not saying you should start at OnlyFans. That's what we're saying.
We're
not saying join OnlyFans. We're saying you don't disown your child.
You're all spurging. Calm down. Let me finish my point. Okay. Dad didn't go where he was. Dad wasn't going and trying to pull him back. He wasn't doing any of this. He was saying, I don't endorse what it is that you're doing, what you're going after. Yes, he did say that. He told him it was a bad idea to leave.
That's a very big difference between saying
he told him it was a bad idea. Now, he left anyway after breaking the fortune, and then when he came back humble with his tail between his legs, crying his eyes out, did his father say, "You've now returned to me, the prodigal son, and now all is forgiven."
You have always is the key word here. You've always been.
They're
my
still
son.
always your kid.
Not if you disown them.
That doesn't mean that you have to.
Not if you disown them.
That doesn't mean you have to enable it.
In the cases that did he not go with them to go and slut it up with whores and blow money on crack? No, he didn't. But she's not saying, "Hey, Dad, come do OnlyFans with me. You should."
My dad is nowhere in my life.
Yeah, but my point is that again, when he came back humble, when he came back correct, when he came back from doing the horrible things that he was doing, then Dad said, "Yes, welcome back in. You were always my son. Of course, I never stopped loving you." But he was not endorsing all the things.
At no point was he disowned, though.
Let me finish. He was not endorsing all the things the kid was doing. He was not going out of his way to make sure that the kid had additional money to continue sinning where he was at. He wasn't doing any of that.
I'm not saying any of these things. The issue is that if Christ is the example for parenting and he loves you every single step of the way,
he's not the only example.
Disowning your child is the opposite of that thing. Now, I am fine with parents getting to decide if they don't want to support that. They tell them explicitly. I would be fine with a relationship. My parents are Christian, my brother's gay. I'm fine with them regularly being.
Can the Catholic Church excommunicate people?
Yes, but the Catholic Church is in no way the same thing as a
parent. So if the Catholic Church excommunicates somebody, are you saying that what they're doing?
Why do they excommunicate?
Let me finish.
Hold on. That's an extremely important
question. We're getting. Stop. Okay, make a final point, and I'm moving.
I'll make it quick. If you make an excommunication, why is it that they're not turning their back on their children?
Okay, an excommunication at an apostolic level of the Catholic Church is about godless fools. It's about
not always.
Pharisees. That is why the Eastern Orthodox was removed. They broke up with because they thought that you got
It was the other way around.
I know you guys broke up with us after, but that's just not true. The reason that they were excommunicated.
You're a Catholic?
I'm not a Catholic, but I'm theologically
come on. You're not a Catholic.
Yeah. I'm more Catholic than I am Eastern Orthodox.
20 seconds.
The reason that churches excommunicate is because they're violating the nature of God himself, not because they're doing a sin that they dislike. It's extremely different, and these types of sins, like blaspheming the Holy Spirit, is in no way comparable to moral sins or virtue sins, which maybe OnlyFans is moral sins, or maybe it's a virtue sin. I'm not sure where it falls specifically, but acting like the church can excommunicate so parents can excommunicate their children is a bastardization of why the Catholic Church does this in the first place.
So let's look at this logically to what you're saying, not what the distinctions in the reasoning are. Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to respond. What the distinction in the reasonings are. Let's look at this from a holistic. You claimed, listen, because Jesus Christ said thing X, it's not proper for you to then say, nope, I'll walk away from this. But it is proper for the Catholic Church to do the same thing under the same circumstances. And your only claim to this is to say that they rejected Christ. So the same thing happens exactly
sin is
here.
not rejecting Christ.
Oh, it can be rejecting Christ.
Yes, blaspheming the Holy Spirit.
But here's the thing. What
what the Pharisees did was bad enough. These are disanalogous, and you're being dishonest.
No, that's not. They're not disanalogous.
Yes,
this is your logic.
No, this is the logic of like all of the theology.
No, it's just your logic.
Okay. Here, wait. Interlude. Can we see an Ahigal? I guess just.
I love the interlude.
Let's do a little reset.
Why don't you do one?
You should
attempt.
You want to try it with me?
No,
wait, you're gonna ask the women to do it, but you're too cowardly to do it yourself.
Can she teach you how to do it?
That seems a little weird.
Go ahead. Do you want to do it?
Oh my God.
Lord have mercy.
Yummy.
We must stay focused, brothers. We must